Welcome back for another night of 10-minute horror. This evening we'll be rounding out our first series before sliding into individual stories this coming Friday night. We hope you've enjoyed listening and reading as much as we've enjoyed writing. This is Never Hold Your Breath, Part 5, The Call of the Void. Floating in front of the new tunnel, I clutched the deep point grip. I looked back to see my line was still with me and trailed back through the cave to the tunnel that would lead us out of here. I checked my air. 40 minutes left. How many tunnels could I search in that time if this one didn't lead to him? This was the wrong kind of thinking. One step at a time. Clear this tunnel, then move on. Clear that one, then move on. And so on until I run out of air. I swam in. I realized the tunnel started narrowing. Not height-wise, but along the sides it was getting tighter. The glowing ahead was getting closer, though. It was definitely some kind of bioluminescence. Probably glowworms. They could live in places like this on nothing, and this was the color they gave off. As I got closer, the more sure I was. The tunnel opened up to a large cave, the majority of which was above water. I could see up through the surface and onto the dry parts. The ceiling of the cave was littered with tiny glowworms, or what looked like them. The cave glowed like nothing I've ever seen. It was beautiful and horrifying. I started to rise to the surface, knowing I had to be careful how quickly I peeked out. If there was anything in here, my arm was spring-loaded to jab forward with this knife. I surfaced, slowly, taking in the vast cave as I did. The walls and ceiling were littered with other tunnel entrances, but not nearly as many as the previous honeycomb, and these entrances had thousands of glowworms surrounding each one. As I took more in, I saw there was a shore that led to a small inlet. It was above water. Almost a cave, but not deep. It looked like an odd-shaped rock was in the middle of the inlet. It was long, dark, and jagged. But then it moved, shifted, like something was inside it. The dark exterior slid downward like a sheet of paper, revealing Clay! He was laying flat in the inlet. His mask was off. My breath hitched and I tried not to move. I didn't want whatever that thing was to see me. What was that thing? I watched it as it slid off Clay onto the rocky surface of the inlet. Its shape was like a long, flat oval, but then it quickly rolled up like a carpet. Long and slender now, it moved like a large snake, slithering up into one of the tunnels and disappearing. What the fuck was that? It looked like a sea blanket at first, but then the snake-like coiling up. I had no time to think further. I could only think about rushing over to Clay, but I didn't rush. I swam over, cautiously. I scanned the tunnels, the cave, the inlet, any sign of more of those things, those creatures. I got to the inlet. I couldn't see any other creatures like that first one, or any others, and Christ, I didn't want to. None of the tunnels looked occupied, and if that thing just left, now's the time to grab him. I set a timer in my head, 30 seconds. Get him back in the water in 30 seconds or less. I steadied my breath and pulled myself up quickly. I rushed to Clay. He had a large, frightening bite on his neck that resembled the honeycomb pattern in the main cave. There wasn't much blood, but that pattern was expanding across his skin and covering his neck like a bruise. I checked his pulse, felt around. I leveled up on his chest with my palms over each other and started CPR right away. Pump, pump, pump. 30 chest compressions. Breathe. Wake up, Clay. Come on, please wake up. Pump, pump, pump. Breathe. I was starting to bawl now, overwhelmed and almost done. Clay's eyes shot open as he sprung to life. He coughed up water and vomited. His eyes were wide and afraid. When they found mine, he wrapped his arms around me. The coughing echoed in the cave and out into the tunnels. That can't be good. We had to leave. Now, I told Clay to put Dad's tank and mask on, but Clay was dazed. His vision seemed far off, like he was looking through water. I pinched his ear hard, which seemed to snap him back. Clay clipped off his harness and slipped on Dad's. He masked up. I told him to follow me and to swim as fast as he could. Something felt off with him, though. He was looking pale and sickly. I unhooked the line and wrapped it tightly through Clay's vest. Then there was movement to the left, over his shoulder. My hand wrapped around the grip. I told Clay to go, but it was too late. The movement was the creature, back to feed. On solid ground, it looked and moved exactly like a snake, zigzagging quickly towards Clay's turned back, its version of a head poised and ready to attack. As it was almost upon Clay, I reached around him, slamming the deep point down. The blade caught the creature, not entirely, but enough for the creature to shriek out in pain and spray out black blood. It darted off into one of the tunnels. The echo of the screech reverberated through the tiny cave and out into each individual tunnel. Then other screeches pierced out, echoing through different tunnels. There were more. Oh shit, there were more. We really had to go now. I yelled to swim and he seemed to be coming back to reality. We jumped in, dipping under and following the line out to the tunnel. As we left the cave, I kept checking back behind us, wondering if it was coming back. When it would come back. There's no way it would just leave. Not if I heard it like that. I was doing the math in my head. 2 minutes out of here. My final flare will last 5 minutes. I'm saving it for when another of those things shows up. So it should last us until we get to the town. hopefully. Problem is, we're not moving very fast. Clay was not being the speedy swimmer I knew. I should be in his dust right now, but instead I'm on his heels. I wanted to yell at him to go faster, but instead I checked back behind us. I kept expecting to see that eel face, but the tunnel remained empty. All I could see was the blue light from the glowworms. No movement at all. Finally, we swam out into the large cavern. The flare was still burning, albeit dimming now. This was taking too long. I swam in front of Clay and unhooked him from the line. I used a carabiner and attached his harness to mine, like a baby Bjorn. The flare below us started to die. The large cavern got darker. As we followed the line and swam towards our tunnel out, I glanced around at the other tunnels. The honeycomb was filled with eyes. They shimmered with the fading light, like cat's eyes. We kicked forward, together, towards the entrance. Getting closer, the flare faded. We entered the tunnel, kicking forward furiously, moving faster now. Clay's torch was still there, shining back at us. Another 20 feet. Keep kicking, Clay, keep kicking. We swam over Clay's torch, and I checked over my shoulder to see my nightmares spilling into reality. The tunnel was filled with the creatures, hundreds of faces, small and large, a writhing tangle of coiled predators following us through the tunnel, little eyes glinting from the light. They had all taken the snake shape. It seemed to move faster that way. The snake shape. Or was it eel? Almost there, I felt snapping at my fins, pulling. Now was the time for the flare. I cracked it, filling the tunnel with red light and swinging it backwards as we swam. The creatures darted around, blinded or burned, but didn't retreat. They weren't leaving. They kept following, snapping, and we kept kicking, kept getting closer. And then we were out and into the blue hole. We swam out and up, kicking violently as the creatures spilled out into the blue hole behind us. Hundreds of them. They kept coming, pouring out of the tunnel, circling us, surrounding us. They started darting in, jabbing at us, opening their mouths and slicing at us with their tiny teeth. I kept swinging the flare and the blade, upward and downward, side to side. Sometimes I'd catch one, but it was quickly replaced by two more. I looked up, but I couldn't see out. They'd completely surrounded us. We were moving upward foot by foot, but this flare was going to run out. I kept swinging though, and we kept kicking. I felt the creatures get a hold of Clay. We were yanked down violently. I looked down, and a few had latched onto his one fin. They wrapped around his leg and each other, forming a long rope. It was like a game of tug-of-war. He kicked at them, and they'd loosen, but they'd get back, strong, and pull us down again. We'd lost ground. We were almost back in the tunnel. A creature hit me in the mask. I swung my blade at it, but another of the creatures caught my wrist with a deep thud. My hand went limp. Only for a second, but enough for me to drop the blade. It sprayed out, floating down and away. That was the last weapon we had. They swarmed in. That was it. We were done. There were too many and we couldn't beat them with our hands. Clay was getting dragged back into the tunnel, pulling me in with him. I felt our strap ripping. They were trying to separate us before pulling us inside. Then we'd never get out. We couldn't fight them in the tunnel. We couldn't even fight them out here. This was it. How we'd die. Together, but apart. No, not yet. The raft. The fucking raft. My hands darted to my side. It was still there, holding the cord tightly with one hand and the handle with the other. I pulled it open. An explosion of plastic flooded my vision. Within a second, I felt my arm yanked upward, jettisoning Clay and I up and away from the tunnel. It was like being attached to a jetpack. We took off, leaving the creatures in confusion at first, but they caught on and darted upwards in pursuit. All hundreds of them. It balanced between thrilling and horrifying, like being on the scariest roller coaster imaginable, only the chance of death was far higher. Then I felt one of them. It must have held on. It was behind me, on my tank, and wrapping around my mask. I tried to grab it, but couldn't reach it. It crawled over my mask, biting down on my neck. Pain shot through my body. My mask cracked. I took a huge breath and yanked the mask off, letting it fall to the side, water flooding my face. The creature went with the mask, confused from my breather's burst of compressed air. It was swallowed up by the mass below, chasing us frantically. I realized I hadn't taken a very large breath, and my lungs were already burning. We flew out of the blue hole, and the town became visible again. All I could see below us were the creatures, desperately trying to get at us, but we were moving just fast enough to keep above them. The black marine snow was still falling, the dead town lighting up with every lightning bolt overhead. Even more of those creatures started to appear from the houses, the buildings, the stores, the sewers. They were joining the ones on our heels, the intruders to their land. My vision started getting spotty. Black dots were forming. Alarms were firing off all over my brain. I needed air like I've never needed it before. My grip loosened on the raft handle. I became weak, and that weakness shot through my body. Hold on a little longer. The strap holding Clay to my carabiner ripped and loosened further. Shit, no, not now. Snap! The strap ripped through. Clay and I were no longer attached. My hand instinctively shot out and grabbed for anything. I managed to catch the shoulder strap on Clay's vest, keeping him from falling into the ferocious writhing mess in pursuit. We kept rocketing upwards, but my grip started to wane on the raft, and on Clay. My hand loosened on the raft, then Clay, then the raft, then Clay. I was losing both of them. One has to go. No, I can't choose. I can't. Not now. Hold on. We shot into the cloud. I lost sight of the creatures. Then we were through and almost at the surface. My eyes shut and I caved and breathed in water. Water shot into my lungs and panic streaked through my brain. Splash. As we punched at the surface, I let go of Clay and the raft. I had held on just long enough. We burst up and out into the stormy waters. I landed on my back, inhaling more water, but throwing it up on Clay's head. I coughed and hacked. My eyes couldn't stay open. I knew we had to keep moving. I knew we both needed to get to a hospital. My head dipped below the water, and I saw hundreds of those little creatures peeking up at us from the cloud, but they didn't come through. They stayed below, like there was a change in the water, separated by the cloud. I pulled my head back up and saw flashlights in the distance. The shore, the lights of the cabin. I kicked towards it. I knew we only had a certain amount of time before the nitrogen buildup would all but paralyze our movements. We needed decom chambers to release the nitrogen through our respiratory systems, or it was going to build up in our tissue, joints, and everywhere else. As it was, everything else in my body felt wrong and damaged. Clay was still kicking. Of course he was. He probably wouldn't remember any of this. I kicked and kicked, the raft abandoned far behind us now. I only opened my eyes for brief moments to see if I was still moving us toward the lights, the cottage. I always was. Something kept pulling me in that direction. Or maybe it was just me. Fear crept back in my mind, thinking about those creatures down below the cloud. What if they came up, just for a second, and tried to pull us down? It wouldn't take much. I had so little energy or fight left, but they didn't come. They stayed on the other side of the cloud. Voices in the distance drifted in. It was Dad, that booming voice echoing over the lake. Then Mom's smothered voice. I kept kicking. Then we hit something, or something hit us. We were on the shore. I felt my dad's hands grab me as his voice drifted away. It felt like I was falling asleep. Maybe that's what dying feels like. When I came to, I was here. My first thought was those creatures, still there, under that cloud, filling those tunnels. But I was safe from them now. Mom's been communicating with me by writing on a notepad and showing me through the glass. Even though she looks sicker than I do now, since everything's locked down, they're letting her stay. Apparently, Clay's out of his chamber at the other hospital. They're shooting him full of meds for the infection from his bite, and he's about to go in for his surgeries. I'm gonna need the same stuff for my bite when I get out. Problem is, the bite's really starting to hurt my throat. The pain in my throat pulls me back to the flooded town, even though my mind was starting to slow. I've read about towns like this before. There were dozens of them in the US. One article was about a town that was flooded in the 1920s. Spanish influenza had torn through it, and the state governor decided the town was beyond saving. So they blew a nearby dam, and it became the bottom of a lake. Is that what happened here? Did those things come up from below and infect the town, making it beyond saving? It was the best sense I could make without deep diving on my laptop. And if I survive this, that's the only deep diving I'll be doing. If I don't survive this, that's as close as I'll get to understanding it. Only 10 more minutes now in this chamber, and then the surgeries start, assuming the surgeons aren't infected with whatever I have and are capable of performing. I need them to fix my lungs. I'm in really bad shape. I held my breath for too long, too deep. Never hold your breath, kids. Unless you have to. That concludes our first story here at 10 Minute Horror. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Moving forward, we'll be here every Friday night with a new original story, so make sure to check back in.